Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Neutrality Studies. My name is Pascal Lota. I'm an associate professor at Kyoto University, and I'm joined today again by Michael von der Schulenburg, a European member of parliament and one of Europe's most ardent voices for peace with Russia and peace with the world. Somebody who's been working for decades also in the United Nations systems, working for peace initiatives between various parties. And he's here today on the very sad occasion of the 4th anniversary of the full-scale war between Russia, Ukraine, and, well, NATO. Michael, welcome back.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, it's actually almost unbelievable as we speak today. You know, we had last night, we had a lot of snow here. Lots of snow, more snow than I've seen probably for the last 10 years. We have now, I'm here in Austria. It's a beautiful country with all the snow. It's all white, that we have 20 centimeters of snow and it's very peaceful. You know, snow makes very peaceful. It appears very calm and we have all the wars around that. It's actually sort of an unreal situation when we talk in this situation now about the anniversary of the sad anniversary, we have to say that, of the Ukraine war.
Yeah, I mean, war is all around us. War with Iran is around us, but the 4-year war with Ukraine has been going on, and the slaughter is unimaginable. We still don't have the numbers. We still don't actually know how many people really died, but the only thing that's sure is that it's in the hundreds of thousands, likely in the millions. And you just wrote, or as this video will be released, you will have published letters to the to Kaja Kallas and the president of the EU Parliament, I believe. Try to tell us what you are telling them and what you've been doing the last couple of days.
Because of the 4th anniversary, you know, there's a group of Germans we set together and we wrote a proposal for how Europe could negotiate peace with Russia. And the argument we make there is that the situation in Europe is so bad now, especially in the European Union, you know, economically, from geopolitically, we have no influence anymore. We have all these wars around us. It's not only the Iran war, it's also all the wars of Israel and so on, and West Africa. We have the problem of the transatlantic alliance. So I think Europe is in a really, really very difficult situation. And the argument we make is, if we want to get out of this, the first thing we have to start to do is to bring peace back to the European continent. And that's, of course, the Ukraine war. The Ukraine war for us has an enormous influence for us and for our future generations. It depends how we're going to live in it. And I think if we want to have peace on the continent, we have to start talking with Russia. So what we had prepared, it's very interesting, people participated in it. There's General Kuyat. He used to be the highest German general at one time, also in NATO. He was a chairperson of the Russia-NATO Council and the Russia-Ukraine Council, so he's very much aware of this one, and I do a lot of work with him. We have Mr. Telchik, who was the advisor to Kohl at the time of the unification, so a foreign policy advisor. We have Peter Brandt, who is the son of Willy Brandt and is now a political scientist. We have Hayo Kuyat, very important political scientist who used to be in the Green Party, not anymore since 1 year. And of course, Mr. Klotz is a journalist, and myself, and I worked 34 years in war countries. So I think there's a lot of knowledge, and we prepared this, and we now...
Just to say, you prepared a peace proposal. Now you're talking about the proposal you drafted to all parties.
It's been published in January. We published it in January in advance of the 4th anniversary. We thought, you know, the 4th anniversary should give us an idea that we should not go in the factories here without doing anything. We have to do something. And so we did this proposal. It's the only proposal there is in Europe. You shouldn't forget, we had never made a peace proposal. And it's very professionally written because, we are quite professional people on these type of things. We say a lot about territory, about security guarantees, about the strength of the army and the future relations, but also the future relations in Europe. And so it's something which you should take. But the important things which we make, the important argument is we make, that we have to start, when we start talking to Russia, we should take a positive approach to it, because there's so much hatred, so much bad language and things like this one. So we suggest that we should appeal to Russia, that the European Union and Russia, two European political entities, have a joint responsibility for Ukraine and for what happens in Europe. So we argue that we should do, this is very different to what the Americans do, that we should have objectives for why we sit together. And I think these objectives, they are relatively easy to agree on, to say, yeah, what is the future of the Ukraine, as an independent sovereign state in Europe? And of course, the other things is, what is going to be the peace and security arrangements for Europe? These are European issues, in which both sides could agree at least that this is the objective of the negotiations. That's how you do it in negotiations, and then, of course, both sides will disagree on these things. They will disagree what it means. But at least we have a positive footing which we could go back, and we don't have this language. We don't have negotiations between losers and winners. We have negotiations between European parties who say things have gone terribly wrong, and we have to think, what is the future now for Ukraine? What is the future for Europe?
Hey, very brief intermission because I was recently banned from YouTube, and although I'm back, this can happen anytime again. So please consider subscribing not only here, but to my mailing list on Substack. That's pascalotta.substack.com. The link's going to be in the description below, and now back to the video. This is something, for 4 years, we didn't have a positive vision of where Europe could work toward. The Russians, I must say, have been saying for the entire time that what they demand is a security structure, is some sort of security arrangement for the continent. The Europeans they haven't said no to it. They just ignored this.
Yeah.
But why do you think it is that this obviously positive proposal from Russia to have a joint security structure is something the Europeans just are silent on? What, in your dealings with your colleagues in the parliament, why don't they react to something that could be exploited to create something?
Pascal, it's even more astonishing if you think that in 1990, after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Cold War, we all agreed on an international treaty which we called the Paris Charter for a new Europe. And in this charter, we agreed that we would not have military blocks dividing us, that we have a joint structure, that security cannot be divided. It went even so far to say that we all are obliged in our security arrangements to do nothing which would threaten the other side. And then we exactly did the opposite in 92. No, we started in 92 when the Soviet Union broke. We didn't follow this anymore. Now, if you read the Charter of Paris, an OSCE document, and it's international law. These things are international law because they're deposited in the Security Council of the United Nations. So they're still applying. And if we would follow this one, we would have basically a sketch of what Europe could maybe look like after this war. But we ignore these type of things. And why we do this, I don't know it, because it's basically against our interest. Our economy is doing badly. We have the highest energy cost in the world. We lose industry. Europe has virtually no foreign policy influence anymore. What happens in Iran or in other parts of the world, and I think that's the result of it. So I don't even understand why we behave as we behave. I just don't understand it. And if I see the language in the parliament, where regularly between 500 and 600 deputies from 720 vote for resolutions which want to have a continuation of the war de facto, in the language is a language of hatred. And for somebody, I've seen wars all my life. I haven't even seen such a language in the Iran-Iraq war. I've never seen a war in which both parties didn't have any contacts. You do this usually, and the contacts are sometimes not directly. Iran-Iraq, also 1 million people dead. There's this big war. It was done through the United Nations, and I was on the Iranian side, on the UN, and think there was always something to discuss. And this time we don't have that. Unbelievable. we see at the same time a breakdown of international law. Trump thinks that he is not bound by treaties anymore or by international law, and we sort of say almost the same thing now. So we don't have an international law really that applies anymore, and we have no agreements anymore on restricting arms. I mean, the last treaty on controlling nuclear weapons, the New START agreement, expired on the beginning of this month, and we have none at all anymore. In a time when these weapons have become far more, since 1960, we don't have any deals anymore on arms, and this is very, very dangerous. I mean, there is no red telephone, there is no confidence-building measures, there's nothing anymore. But we have now rockets, which in the old time 60s, we needed 6 hours to throw a nuclear bomb on Russia or vice versa. And now it's a few minutes, and it's a very dangerous thing indeed. And we have a meeting like in Munich, the security meeting in Munich, and there's no agreement on this at all. We do as if this all is not a problem. It is a completely irrational behavior. I would say it's a behavior of people who realize that they're losing. We always say when we negotiate with people that the side which uses hate language is usually the losing side.
Yeah.
It's just human, and that's how we behave. So I think what we're suggesting there is a way out. We have to get a way out of this one. And that's also why we wrote now the letter to Callas, to Maya Callas, because it's her responsibility. And we copied it to all the EU ambassadors in Brussels. And we wrote a letter to Mrs. Metsola, the president of the European Parliament. And we copied it to the committees for foreign relations and security, and also to the heads of all the political parties. We see what the reactions is. So I fear there will be no reaction whatsoever, but at least we want to do something. We want to use this anniversary and say we can't, I mean, how can Europe accept that we go into the 5th year of one of the most dangerous wars we have on European soil, and we don't do anything to try to stop it? It's unbelievable. It's really unbelievable. It's an irresponsibility of unbelievable proportion.
The people you're addressing these letters to and the peace proposal on the European side are the ones who would tell you that they want to finish the war yesterday, but that the only one who can do so is Vladimir Putin, who has to leave Ukraine, including Crimea, and then be willing to have a trial in The Hague. They are still, even today, they're still saying that. I can't believe the level of inability or unwillingness to actually engage in something like a proper process to work out of this. In the wars that you have seen, is there a moment when this kind of deadlock mindset breaks and opens up space for an actual process to begin?
Yeah, I think the war in Iraq-Iran war, which was the largest war I've ever been involved in, actually the negotiations for the ceasefire took place in my house, and we were almost all killed for that. I mean, it's an interesting thing how these things work. Making peace is a very dangerous thing because many people don't want peace.
Yeah.
And that's usually the people who have their arms and are prepared to use violence. And that's, of course, in the Ukraine also the same thing, no, I would assume, no? So Zelensky's in a very difficult situation. I don't want to be in his skin, but so, no, I think, the thing is, for us in Europe, when you look at the newspapers, when you look at the debates, they're full of moral. He started the war, they rape women, they steal children, they shoot people, they destroy the cities. We do this, of course, with our weapons too, but that's how typical talk in wars. And I'm sure in Russia they say the same thing. The others started it. They are imperialists. And we say they are imperialists, whatever. This is the typical of war talk. I mean, this is something, if you are used to this in negotiations, you have simply to ignore it. We should not forget, wars are immoral, but they are not about moral. They are about interests. And when you have a war, like in the old Clausewitz sense, you have a war when you cannot solve your conflicting interests through negotiations, either by not negotiation, what we did in the Ukraine case, or or you can't come to a solution, then the war is a solution. So you give it over to a war, you start like in a bar, you start a fist fight because you can't agree on who should winning the football game or whatever. And then this is going to decide it. And in the case of the war in Ukraine, we had always assumed that we would win it very easily, and that's why we went into it. And we didn't. Now it looks like Russia wins it. Now, if Russia would have lost it, Ukraine would be now in NATO. Russia would have lost the access to the Black Sea, and probably a large portion of the pro-Russian population would have left Ukraine. Now, it looks, if there is a situation where nobody wins, then it's when you have a ceasefire. But we don't have, because Russia looks like winning. So Russia will determine the agenda of peace negotiations. We have to accept that. There is nothing we can do. If we can't militarily change it, we have to accept the outcome of a war. Yeah, this is all wars. I mean, there is no negotiations which ignores what happens in a war, and that's what we do. We disagree. You don't want to accept the reality created by 4 years of war.
But the problem is that on the losing side, you always have a faction that will want to continue. I mean, Japan, the militarists in Japan in 45, in the final days in August, the militarists, they said they want 100 million martyrs. Japan only had 60 million inhabitants, but they added the 40 million from Korea, saying we will all collectively fight to the last drop. And it was actually the tie-breaking vote of the emperor who said, like, no, we're going to side with the others. We will suffer the insufferable. That's literally what he then recorded and broadcasted to the Japanese people. Suffer the insufferable. We will give up in order to save the nation from complete destruction. But there were those who want to continue. And it seems to me that in Europe, that faction has the upper hand.
Yeah, and the sad thing is, those people who argue for continuing the war, it's not their blood that is spilled. It's not the blood of their sons and daughters. I mean, in Japan, at least, their sons were in the war. They were pilots and soldiers and things like that. But here we do something extremely immoral. People who argue for a continuation of war don't have the burden of the war. And this is something which we shouldn't accept. Now, we have the historical experience. We know that when you don't accept negotiations to end the war, what happened in Japan, that there were 2 nuclear bombs thrown on Japan afterwards. And that sort of broke, in the end, the stalemate on, they said, we have to negotiate peace. And
but there's a good argument that it was Russia's entry into the war that broke the military calculation. But anyway, the point is,
at least he decided to have the nuclear war, saying we should. I think that these new weapons, it was really stunning for them. And I'm sure that whatever, they decided that they couldn't win anymore. And we shouldn't forget, this is a good example also in another sense, because look what happened to Japan. I mean, they negotiated out of the war. It was all destruction. And now Japan is again a very prosperous country. And I think the same thing could happen to the Ukraine. Ukraine has to think about its own interests, and their own interest is not to follow the interest of Western Europe or NATO Europe, to say. They have to see that this continuation of war means just killing people. A lot of people leave also the country because of the conditions. I mean, they are in a death spiral, the population. They go down and down and down. This country is not going to survive if they continue it. And I think the Ukrainians should not go to a degree where the army collapses. Because if an army collapses, you usually have also the political system that collapses. And then you will have a very difficult time in Ukraine to remain a functioning state. And so a loss could be devastating for Ukraine, something which is covered up by our press, but it could be devastating if Ukraine starts to lose the war completely. So better negotiate now, and we should support them in negotiating, the Europeans, and not enticing them to continue the war.
in your assessment, I mean, we've seen a change in the dynamic that started about a year ago when the Trump administration came in and for the first time actually showed willingness to negotiate with the Russians. However, these negotiations remained on the one hand very high level between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin with phone calls and one actual meeting in Anchorage, and then they remained on the somewhat on a lower level, but they never went further uh, uh, um, into a concrete proposal for a solution. And what we've recently seen now in just this week in Geneva is just the latest iteration of still a very, in my view, a shallow political process and not a technical process. Would it change the dynamic if the Europeans actually picked up the phone and said, uh, Russia, Vladimir and Sergei, uh, um, um, let's actually have a real discussion? Do you think that this could change the dynamics?
I think the Europeans have very little influence on the war, except that they're the spoilers for peace. When Europe repeats all the time that Ukraine should become member of NATO, if they repeat all the time that Russia has to leave all the territories in the Crimean Peninsula, if they insist on a Russian leadership to have to be tried on a special court, and if they insist that Russia is paying trillions of dollars for the reparations and things like this one, they basically demand, after 4 years of war, that Russia capitulates. And Russia will not capitulate because the war is going very well for it. If maybe the war got different, it might be a different thing. But by doing this one, we create a situation where Russia could not trust any agreement. I mean, it's already difficult to trust the Americans with any agreement. They have a tendency to break them when it suits them. But I mean, the Europeans, basically, I mean, they stop the war and Europe says, we bring you into NATO. What is Russia then doing? They couldn't start the war again. So I think we force them. I mean, if you also not forget, when in the beginning of the war, when we had the negotiations in Istanbul, there were no territorial demands from Russia, none. The only agreement was on the Crimean Peninsula, in which the agreement says for 15 years it stays under Russian administration, but we will find a diplomatic solution for the Crimea, maybe a joint administration, whatever, not through war. But it was not. Russia only started to conquer territory when this agreement failed. And they realized they will never get an agreement on NATO and things like this one if they are not going to destroy parts of Ukraine. And that's so. I think we have a deep guilt on the continuation of the war since the last 4 years, at least since Istanbul, because we boycotted Istanbul. We said we don't sign this, and there was a NATO meeting in 24 of March and things like this one, which says we should not negotiate with Russia, and then the Ukrainians gave in.
It's just hard for me to wrap my head around that the people who say that you cannot that they still, to this day, people use the language of we cannot reward the Russians for their aggression. They're framing it as if though having a peace agreement and actually accepting realities would be something that Europe gives. It's like it's our gift to Russia. And that the people who say that are the same who say that we must never reward aggression are the same people who when the last Iran war happened last summer, called it dirty work, and they are the ones who are completely utterly fine and support, of course, what happened to Kosovo. The changing the
Iraq, Syria. There is a Pascal, there is a statistics by the U.S. Congress, which for the 30 years from the Wolfowitz Doctrine, which was issued on 92, saying there's only one superpower, we decide now what the world is going to do for the next 30 years until 2022, that the U.S. has intervened militarily 251 times in third countries. And they were all against international law because the U.S. never asked the Security Council for any of this, what they're doing there. And the sad thing, and we see this now with Ukraine too, not a single intervention has resulted in more democracy. Not a single intervention has resulted in the better rule of law or something like this one, or in better economic conditions. The opposite was all these wars, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, just these cases we know a bit better, ended in chaos and anarchy and terrible human sufferings. And we still do it now. And I can't understand that we don't realize, I mean, even if it was illegal to do this, but if we say, but people have now been in a better position, but they're not in a better position. And nowhere they are a better position. So I think these whole wars has also not put the West in a better position because, look what happens in Afghanistan. We have a Taliban regime there again and things like this one. In Syria, we have the head of the al-Nusra Front becoming now president. I mean, it's almost unbelievable. There was a $20 million reward on his head before. I mean, we make him now president. I mean, this is not a world we create with all the violence, with having military superiority that is in any way becoming better. So we have to think differently about it.
Of course we do, but the most interesting thing to me is that part of your proposal, or one of the people who wrote the proposal, is General Harald Kujat. Again, highest military officer in Germany, and also the military highest military officer in NATO back in the past. That he, as a military man, from the very beginning, understood the dynamics, the power dynamics, and from the beginning has said, no, if we want peace, we need to change. But what happened to his what happened to people like him? Why are people like him not anymore present in the military establishment? Or if they are, why are they silent? I mean, wouldn't it also be up to the military of Europe to say, like, God damn it, we need to stop, we need to empower the diplomats?
I mean, if you see, I mean, this document, the enormous problems to publish it in Germany. Virtually not. Nachdenkseiten. Not even the Berliner Zeitung wanted to publish it. In the end, it was the Weltwoche who published it. And you talk about these things. But we all in this group are conservative people. We are not some radicals or anything like this one. We have all various experiences with wars and how to end wars. So it's a professional document, how to end the war. It is not an anti-Ukraine thing. It's not taking the Russian side. We try to argue that this is in the European interest and as a EU interest to have peace. And that's what we have to pursue. But we have been treated like traitors. I mean, this is unbelievable. It's unbelievable. And yeah, I mean, if I'm in the European Parliament, I'm being screamed down if I speak. And I don't even accuse people. I mean, these letters to Callas and Metzola are extremely polite. No, I'm always writing very politely, but of course I have a certain thing that we have to end this war. And I think we should all be ashamed, all Europeans, including the Russians, of course. We should all be ashamed that after 2 world wars, we have again a war on European soil that is so dangerous, so devastating. And after 4 years, being in the 5th year, we are not even talking in Europe. I'm not talking about the Americans. We are not talking even trying to somehow to solve the war. And we all know from history, all wars in the end have to be ended politically. That means they have to be negotiated if you want to have it ended, and even a ceasefire. But in this case, we need probably a peace agreement, not only a ceasefire. So they should be very happy with what we are suggesting. And we are saying even that we should not have these negotiations between losers and winners in the war. We should rather appeal to our joint responsibility for the future of Europe, our joint responsibility for Ukraine being our all neighbor. It's a European state between Russia and the EU. And so we have a responsibility to work something out. And this joint responsibility should bring us together on the table. So it's a very mild, very positive sort of approach to this whole peace issue. And even that one, I mean, we don't get published.
I'm in Switzerland right now, right? And I gave a couple of talks in support of Swiss neutrality, and I gave one talk where I didn't use the word Russia even once. I think I didn't use it even once, and I just talked about the destructiveness and the negative consequences and effects of sanctions, and how they are an instrument of war. And I had one person walking out saying that he doesn't want to listen to this Russian propaganda and to pro Putin speech, and that if we applied the same standards to Hitler, then Hitler would still rule Europe today. And this is to me like this mindset of Europe that Hitler, even 80 years after his death, he still manages to ruin peace with the idea that you need to fight against him. It's the long shadow of Hitler that encourages the you know Central Europe to say like, no, this needs to be fought out, and we need to defeat Hitler. I mean, they think in these concepts. I don't know how to break that up. How to make it clear that the Russians are not the Nazis.
The sad thing is, you see the long shadow of Hitler. If we bring up this argument, unfortunately, we're sitting in the shadow.
We do. So how to get out of the shadow?
You know that if a German chancellor compares Putin to Hitler, a German chancellor,
Yes,
having being successor of a chancellor called Hitler, who killed maybe 27 million Soviets, of which the great majority were Russians. 27, far more than Jews or anything like this one. And, my parents were Russians. We came back from Russia. We were not Aryans in Germany. I mean, we shouldn't forget all these things. And he tells the Russians that the other one is a Hitler. I mean, there is a tastelessness in this whole thing. And also it is the language, or the French foreign minister says Russia will disappear from history when they don't accept our peace proposal, which is basically asking for capitulation and things like this one. If Kalla says we have to win over Russia in order to break Russia up, and it's even part of a resolution of the UN Parliament. It's in one of those resolutions. I mean, how can we ever talk peace? Ever talk peace? I mean, we Europeans, we should know. I mean, this whole thing about diplomacy and things like this one was so much developed in Europe because we had many states who always had somehow war among themselves. And then we have this experience, and we seem to throw all things through the window and seem not to remember anymore who killed Akjehun in the Second World War, and who whether Hitler was a Russian or rather an Austrian who became a German chancellor. I mean, what do you say? What do you say? I don't know what to say. And that it is also so strong. You see, my position is that I'm here not to defend China or Russia or anything like this one. That they can do it themselves. The argument I try to make is to say to the people in the parliament, it is in our own interest to seek a peace agreement, because we are being the losers of this war too, as the European Union, and we have to do it. It's in our interest to do that, and and we are obliged to that because we are signed the UN Charter. In many countries, like in Germany, it's even a constitutional requirements to seek peace and things like this one, and we don't do this.
That's why my question is really how to convince our own side, how to convince our compatriots of the necessity to rethink the entire framework of how this tragedy is being approached. And this is, of course, where we enter the realm of propaganda and of narrative framing and of cognitive warfare, not against the other side, but against our side. It's just I want a way out of this. I want
we can't talk to Putin because he's so bad. I mean, the thing is that peace negotiations are always between enemies. I mean, otherwise there would be not peace negotiations. I mean, it's just what it is. And then so I think there's no justification not to do it. They say Russia doesn't want to negotiate, but Russia talks to the Russians. They have now received the envoy from Macron. They answered the telephone when Scholz tried to call putting their advice that they have a different position on the whole thing. Of course, they have a different position. They see it differently, but that's what peace negotiations are about. So it is the argument we make is basically that peace negotiations are not useful. We want to win the war, and we just tell them afterwards what it is. But you see, even when you win the war, it would be difficult to end. Look at this First World War with the Versailles Treaty, where Germany signed that they were guilty for the war. 21 years later, we were in Paris, the Germans. I mean, peace is a difficult thing, and it has to be negotiated. I mean, it shouldn't be dictated like the Versailles Treaty. We have to talk to the Russians. We have to try to get sense, and that takes time. That takes patience, and it takes especially a change of language. If you call somebody Hitler, you cannot negotiate with a person.
Is there a way to do that? Because actually in conflict theory, interpersonal conflict theory, one of the major steps is actually to start with meta communication about communication. Could that be a way to say, like, let's have a meeting with the Russians to just discuss language, not the war, just language, or to create a process to discuss language with the Russians?
But when you look at our peace proposal, what I just said before, that's exactly a precondition. That's not the negotiations or peace negotiation. It's just that we agree on what is our common ground on which we wanted to talk about it. This is relatively easy to agree on, because it would allow having huge differences in how we implement the whole thing. But it's what you say. We need something in advance to agree that we have a joint responsibility for Ukraine. We have a joint responsibility for the future of Europe. I mean, Merz just discovered after 4 years that Russia is also a European country. It was also before. But I mean, this is something we have to do. And we are not prepared to do this. And I think it would also be easy for us, because we also have to step out of our old war propaganda. All countries have war propaganda. The Russians will have it. We have it. I mean, it's just what it is. But I think when we start talking peace or finding a solution, we have to establish such preconditions first. I think that's otherwise it would not be possible.
But
Whatever you call it in your theory, I'm not a theorist. I'm a practical person, but I can tell you, I know a little bit about these negotiations. It's extremely important to seek some common ground before you really start negotiations.
Could we do this? What we need to sidestep the warmongers. We need to sidestep those who want to continue this. So, like, how about an interparliamentary process between you and the 10 or handful of members, and the reaching out to parliamentarians in Russia not to discuss the peace, just to discuss language of peace and language of interest. No negotiations, really, just the vocabulary, just to set up that. Because these other people, they don't move. They are immovable ideologues. So how to get around that?
Yeah, you know that I went with a group of parliamentarians in May last year, for the 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War, to Russia. We had very interesting talks, and where it all stuck, because the idea was that I would also go to Kiev, but it's not possible. I mean, the Ukrainians, I keep talking to them. I will also write now a letter again to them, because I mean, we should be concerned of what happens to Ukraine. But I think their future lies not in continuing the war. They should cut their losses and consider how they can improve their living standards, and what their situation is between BRICS countries and the European Union. I mean, they have a lot of options there, I think. And yeah, but this hasn't happened. And I think it's because we had really a fallback. I mean, it's almost now, when I've been in the parliament, how much I get on all these things, is that the positions has hardened, actually. It hasn't softened, it has hardened. And I do a lot against about these sanctions against individuals now, because I think this sort of sanctioning people who say for them the wrong thing. And now the German foreign ministry threatened a journalist when he put a question forward, that about the sanctions. I mean, really, like at the totalitarian regimes, no? I mean, a foreign ministry official, no? And So I think we see a hardening, and I think it's the hardening is the danger is that we get into a very nasty phase of the war towards the end, and and I fear that we always say there will be 1 million Russian dead or whatever these numbers are, we don't know. But I think the experience in wars, of course, and we have, I mean, I have some experience with wars, is that the losing side loses most of the people. It's simply because when you lose, your discipline starts to falter. You have to go out of well-defended positions into less defended positions. And that's when this side loses usually far more people than the other side. And I fear, and I don't know, but I fear that happens now to Ukraine. And that's a very sad thing, very, very sad thing. The Ukraine has one of the lowest population growth rates. Most families have maybe one child, and that this child doesn't come back, or it comes back without legs, or comes back so traumatized by the war that they will never have children anymore. And I've seen people traumatized. I've seen a lot of war things in my life, and the impact on war. And when I sit in this European Parliament and they make these resolutions by people who just had a cup of coffee, have their warm shower, come to the office and have something for the evening and nice talk, and in the meantime they decide that the war has to be continued. And I sit then up in this Parliament and think, I feel actually sometimes more disillusioned than in all the times I was actually in the real wars. Because in real wars, whether it's Afghanistan or Iran or Iraq or Syria or Sierra Leone, all these things I've done, you can talk to people. But I have a feeling in Europe, you can't talk to anybody. You can't talk to anybody.
Yeah, and the sad part of the sociology of war is that the people who are the most removed, the farthest removed, are usually the ones who are the most ardent supporters of it. Well,
Yeah.
usually when you ask people in the war-torn areas, the people who did lose relatives and friends, they're the ones who say, like, no, it needs to stop. Whatever happens, it needs to stop. And it's the people who never lost anyone who say, like, no.
Actually, when you realize that you can't win it anymore, I mean, why do you continue a war? I mean, we always say, it will turn around, Russia is going to lose it. But for now, in all the 4 years, when you look, the first year was different. But from that time onwards, after the summer offensive of 2023, it's very clear with every month, Ukraine is in a worse military position, and therefore also it's standing for negotiations declines. It's just what it is. It's in the Ukraine war like in all the other wars, and we basically asked them to continue. I mean, what for? If they had negotiated a year ago, they were in a better position. If they would have followed the things of the Istanbul things, there would be hardly anybody be killed. And this is so we bear a huge responsibility. I mean, these Merz, these Macrons, these Starmers, they have a huge responsibility for all this killing that happens now in Ukraine. A huge responsibility, and they shouldn't tell me that they're on the moral better side and support. They call it support. I call it actually assistance to kill people. And because that is a war that doesn't make sense anymore.
Former U.S. Ambassador Chas Freeman is the person who coined the expression at the very beginning of the war that the NATO will be willing to fight to the last Ukrainian, and they haven't changed the strategy, and the last Ukrainian hasn't fallen yet.
But
I don't know. It's sorry.
I understand. The Ukrainians are being betrayed by us. If I look at the pictures from the Elysee Palace when they agreed on the coalition of the willing, you saw everybody tries to kiss President Zelensky and squeeze him and all the rest of it. And afterwards, we had a huge ceremony where the ex-colonial powers of Great Britain and France signed the treaty as if we were still in the 18th century. Anyway, and then afterwards, Merz comes and says there won't be any soldiers in Ukraine unless Russia agrees to it. So it was gone. So why do we squeeze Zelensky? We betray him all the time. There won't be a coalition of the willing in Ukraine. There won't. There will not be these security guarantees of Article 5. Security guarantees in the world don't exist. France will not engage a nuclear bomb to defend Kharkiv if the risk is that they are losing Paris. Never. It's an illusion. And also, it's an illusion that we think that the Americans go on a nuclear war with Russia because they want defense of Germans. No way. And so we do with the Ukrainians always illusion that there is something around the corner which will save them, change the world around, and things like this one. And then what we really do, we betray them. I think it's a huge betrayal of the Ukrainians. I feel, when you look at my papers, I write never anything negative about the Ukrainians or also the internal things, because in my view, including the government, they are betrayed people, betrayed by governments, my government also, governments in Europe. And so I'm not saying anything bad about them. I think we have a responsibility to end the war, the Europeans, and they should come to their senses. So if you can help us, for instance, the letters we send out to in the European Parliament, that people see this and they see that these letters are very reasonable. They are not hatred or there's no Russian propaganda or anything like this, but that people see that there is, on this anniversary, that we try to use my membership of the European Parliament to do something in this central institution to do something for peace. Of course, I'm not very optimistic about the things, but doing nothing would be even worse, no?
Yeah, that's the point. Doing nothing would be even worse, and I congratulate you, Michael. I mean, there is a peace faction in Europe. There is, and you're at the vanguard of it. You are the vanguard of it.
Just a result, when I go in the elevator, people turn around, they don't say hello to me, I mean, I have
but that is not sad. It is sad, but it is not because you did something wrong. It's because you're doing things right. And the letters that you're talking about, they will be published on my Substack on Sunday. So by the time this episode,
also the article, the article where we say that we need now courage to do peace. Europe has to change direction, and changing direction politically needs not only knowledge and skills. It needs above all courage. And I wish that our leadership in the EU, and you will see these letters are very positive in the sense, saying, take the courage, make a change, let's have peace, and people will be grateful to you. Let's say that. Yeah.
They will. And I can only congratulate you, Michael, and please do continue and do keep us updated on what's going on. We need to create also the mental space for peace, because right now war is crowding out the peace space. That's it. So we need to get out of that. We need to get out of war mentality. We need to get back to peace mentality.
And at least we should not miss. It's courage. There's in wars that things are very important, which we often can't define, like courage, like trust. I mean, you can't make agreements when you don't create trust. But what is trust? And so things like this. But this is all very, very important. And people who negotiate peace agreements, who know how to deal with things, know how a little bit how to do this. And so it's a pity that in the German government, nobody talks to us. I mean, I think those people who wrote the things, there is a lot of knowledge there. I mean, these are not I don't know, school teachers or what, university students or whatever. No, I think we bring a lot of knowledge there, and I think we should be taken seriously. And I think the proposals is in the structure better written than all the Americans do, actually. And not that I think they shouldn't do it, but I think it's a far more professional thing. And so we could be proud because we have this knowledge in Europe to do this. But people don't want to know.
No, the people who sit there don't want to know. They still prefer war over negotiations. Look, Michael, I am very grateful for all you do in the European Parliament. You're really a lighthouse in very dark times. I think we will leave it here, and please keep informing us. Everybody, you can find this on Substack. You can find these things
and help us to set out the message, not only through the interviews, but also on your website, that people see that, because we have no other way. the regular media will ignore us. They wouldn't even write about us, not even negatively. I mean, it would be also already a success, but they just ignore us. And with this one, I fear they ignore peace, unfortunately.
They do. It's it's the escalation of things. First they ignore you, then they fight you, and then you win. We're still in stage one. So, and in a sense, more is to come. But we need to get to the real social societal debate, right, with the others.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
Michael von der Schulenburg, thank you very much for your time.
It was really kind of you. Thank you.